Okay, how are you doing, Doctor? It's good to have you back with a very interesting topic in hand for today's discussion. Yes, now in terms of the topic which we have today in schedule to discuss under the 21st century leadership, which is the governance disruptions. Before I dive into the topics which we have in hand, Doctor, I would love to hear more in terms of a blue ocean strategy, because something which you have elaborated in your book. In the meantime, how do you really bring this challenge, focusing on profitability and at the same time protecting the planet? At the same time, you keeping your activities sustainable. Even in your 21st century leadership fight code red for business, in that model, the leadership model you spoke of earlier in our previous podcast, economic, environmental, and social values, which you very nicely articulated the deepness of these subjects, the importance of these subjects for businesses to thrive and at the same time become sustainable. And how do you really marry new technologies and also to understand your environmental pressure points, which is geopolitical disruptions? But today, everything sits above a very specific rule, which I will call it, is the governance. And then you have elaborated in your book, the governance is such an important element because all of these above will not get executed or will not come to life if you don't have strong governance. So, with a blue ocean strategic mindset, with the rest of the leadership, 21st leadership mindsets, I would like to hear from you, Doctor. What is this governance is all about?
Excellent. So, thank you very much, Dechana. Today, we are talking of probably the basic foundation of the entire model rests on ensuring that we have a very solid governance foundation laid, and that governance foundation can be laid by 21st century leaders, and that is going to be a prerequisite for us to move forward in the entire model. So, as we go into the governance disruption module, I want to first recollect two or three key points I made about who is the 21st century leader. And if you remember, one of the first points I made about a 21st century leader was that they appreciate and mobilize science in strategy. And this is the fundamental step that is needed for a 21st century leader. Because as we look at the three topics that you talked about, the interjection between people, planet, and profit, the triple bottom line as mentioned by John Elkington, unless you have a science background, you're going to always, as a default position, put profit before people and put profit before planet. Do you agree with me on that?
I certainly do, Doctor. I certainly do.
You
The
see?
challenge that I, the challenge that I'm trying to figure it out. Most organizations are driven and they are being recognized based on the profitability and
Yep.
all the stakeholders in terms of um, the owners of the business and also other stakeholders in the business. It can be even customers. It can be uh, uh, the investors to the business. All these people are driven by its profitability because they believe if the company is not profitable, they cannot sustain, they cannot reinvest, they cannot innovate. So that's where I'm trying to understand how you really bring sustainability and profitability into a level which companies will thrive more than it used to. I would say even
Yes.
10x.
Yes. So the fundamental challenge for any business in the future is to ensure that they have a sustainable business model that delivers profitability. And the only way you can have a sustainable business model from a governance point of view is, I'm going to make a new pitch for the term governance, is when uh, every decision that the company is making is evaluated from the perspective of profit and planet, people and planet, before we get into profitability. Because if we ignore people and if we ignore the planet, all the profits we make can get wiped out due to the climate emergency and the health and social emergency. So that is the fundamental message that I'm giving everyone today, that a 21st century leader committed to governance is one who places people and planet before profit and evaluates all the options for that scenario before making a final decision on profitability, because what you're securing is strategic profitability, not short-term profitability if you do that. So with that, I'm going to first give about four examples of national leaders and world leaders who have placed profit before people and who have placed profit before planet. So I'm sure the first example I'm going to give you will resonate quite well with you, was the whole COVID-19 impact on the world. Now, when COVID-19 began to impact the world, the three countries which had the highest casualties and fatalities and deaths due to COVID-19 were, in this order: the USA with the highest number of COVID deaths, Brazil was number 2 in terms of COVID deaths, and India was number 3 in terms of COVID deaths. Now, let's look at those three examples. The United States of America at the time was led by a president who basically had his own ideas about health and the vaccination of people and even the need for masking up. And interestingly, the Brazilian leader at that time, a gentleman called Bolsonaro, had the same attitude towards healthcare, prevention of uh, COVID, vaccinations for COVID. And both these leaders put profit before people, and they opened their economies much faster than all other countries. And India was the third to do that, who tried to open the economic side of things and ended up having the third largest casualties in the world. So, governance disruption number one is where world leaders have always put profit before people. And when you do that, the end result is you end up compromising people's lives. And COVID was a great example of how simply by leaders ignoring the science, because if you don't subscribe and respect the science, then you are going to end up with a governance disruption. And this is a classic example of leaders ignoring the science and ending up with massive casualties in terms of healthcare, deaths in terms of COVID. And what was also interesting in the top two countries that I mentioned, USA and Brazil, is that in both instances, They were the healthcare professionals who were advising the government. In the case of Brazil, nearly 3 to 4 health ministers were fired. And in the US, the key health advisor, Dr. Fauci, was constantly ridiculed by the leader. So, the first principle of 21st century leadership is a leader who appreciates and mobilizes and respects science. If you don't, then you'll end up putting profit before people. Now, let me get to the second example. The second example is one that I'm sure you have heard of. For, for the longest period, Coca-Cola company was having their main product in a glass bottle. And when they did that, they were quite successful, and they even made a marketing strategy out of the shape of the glass bottle. However, in latter years, the leadership changed and they completely moved away from glass bottles into plastic bottles. And why did they do that? They did that for only one reason, because they put profit before planet. And when the moment they put profit before planet, yes, they made greater profits, but very, very quickly, Coca-Cola was known as the world's #1 single-use plastic polluter. And they are #1 polluter by a mile, followed by the companies PepsiCo, Nestle, Mondelez, and companies like Mars and Unilever. But Coke remains the #1 polluter of the planet with single-use plastics. So, second example of putting profit before planet. The third quick example I look at is the amount of money the world is spending on military and defense. And it is quite by chance that we are looking at global military combined spends are closing in on 5 to 6 trillion US dollars. But the interesting thing is the world needs about $6 trillion to move into renewables and to stop the increase in temperatures. But in every one of these instances, the leaders of the world who are investing in military spending are putting profit before the planet. So that's the third example. I want to move into a fourth example, which is a majority of the global banking industry, and I will refrain from mentioning too many names here. I can see that the expenditure that they committed to stop when they moved into the Paris Agreement in 2015 December, all of them have violated that Paris Agreement and spent close to 3 to 4 trillion US dollars in funding fossil fuel projects. And if you check on each of those banks, the reason they've done that is because most of those banks have taken decisions based on putting profit before planet and people. So the examples I have given you are few, but every one of them illustrate one key point. And the key point is, if leaders do not subscribe to the science, then it is very easy for those leaders to put profit before planet and profit before people. And in all cases, the people will suffer, the planet will be degraded, and the profits they make will be erased and wiped out with the kind of extreme weather incidents that we are now experiencing. The one sector that has absolutely put profit before the planet and people is the fossil fuel industries. And global fossil fuel leaders have done this very openly by putting profit before the people and profit before the planet. And I would say almost all the oil industry leaders have done that, whatever company we talk about. So if you look at the amount of money that the oil industry has been investing to basically fight the lobby to stop this, we see that there is a massive change happening in this whole sector. So the governance disruption is where the world is actually subsidizing the very cause of the climate emergency. And how do they do that? They are doing that by subsidizing fossil fuels. Now, all of us know that when we did the first episode on the podcast was on climate emergency. And when we studied the climate emergency, we said the climate emergency is when you burn fossil fuels like coal, like petroleum, like diesel, they release carbon dioxide. And the carbon dioxide, as we put the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, traps the heat, and the planet's temperatures go up. And as the temperatures cross these 1.5, 2, 2.5, and 3 degrees centigrade average margins, the planet begins to experience extreme weather like we are experiencing in Los Angeles as we speak. So I would like to term subsidizing fossil fuels as the biggest global governance compromise. And as at 2023, we were subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune of $5.9 trillion. And if you look at that figure carefully, that is saying that we are subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune of $14.5 billion per day, or $600 million per hour, or $10 million per minute, or $168,000 per second if you are spending $5.9 trillion to subsidize the cause of the climate emergency. And if you look at the numbers as we go forward from 2023 to 2024 and 2025, these figures have now reached close to $7 trillion per annum. $7 trillion is, in global GDP terms, the global GDP is $105 to $106 trillion. So $7 trillion is close to 10% of that. And that is an unforgivable sum of money and a global compromise to do that. What is also stunning is that the world needs $6.9 trillion per annum to keep global temperatures under 2 degrees centigrade. That is the money needed for mobilizing the renewable energy move and exiting fossil fuels. And when people ask me the question, but how do we fund $6.9 trillion? The answer is staring at your face, because we are already subsidizing oil to the tune of $7 trillion. So the money is there. What we need are leaders who understand this and who put science and before all decisions. And any leader doing that will immediately put people and planet before they make decisions on profitability. And this is the reality of the world. If we look at the main companies that are spending tremendous sums of money and making unbelievable profitability and revenue, companies like Saudi Aramco, like Chevron, like Sinopec, ExxonMobil, Shell, Total, British Petroleum are the big companies who are basically compromising the planet. And in terms of the use of fossil fuels, the countries that are compromising the use of fossil fuels, the number one culprit is the United States of America, followed by China, followed by India, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and Brazil. Now, I'm sure you have heard of a famous American vice presidential candidate who also was a presidential candidate, Al Gore. And here is what he had to say at a TEDx event in 2023. He said the fossil fuel industry has used fraud on a massive scale. They have used falsehoods on an industrial scale. And they have used their legacy and political and economic networks lavishly funded to capture the policymaking process in too many countries around the world. And he goes on to say the oil and gas sector has made almost no progress towards the Paris Agreement goals since 2021. There has been little advance, alarmingly, even some decline in oil and gas company progress in terms of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Dishana, one of the things that you will know is the world crossed the 1.5 degrees centigrade for the first time in the year 2024, and we actually went up to 1.6 degrees centigrade. And one of the other interesting findings in all of this is that the biggest obstacle to the development and the use of direct air capture may be physics, because there's already talk of carbon capture, and this is really not a feasible option. CO2 makes up about 0.35% of air. That means we had to expansively filter and vacuum all the 99.965 of the air that is not CO2 in order to capture it. And it doesn't even pretend to address other harmful emissions from fossil fuels, including methane, black carbon, nitrous oxide, particulate air pollution, and mercury. So this is the reality the world is faced with. And the many COP meetings that we have held up till now, unfortunately, we just had COP29 in Azerbaijan, and we were all expecting to see progress in terms of commitment to transitioning away from fossil fuels and net zero by 2050, tripling the renewables deployment, and the achievement of the nationally determined commitments by the 196 countries that pledged it, action on methane emissions, and a loss and damage fund. But unfortunately, none of these commitments were made. In fact, they have made a cursory glance and a small figure to fight climate emergencies. That's about it. But the phase out of fossil fuels, which was originally targeted at 2030, is no longer even being discussed. And the exiting of fossil fuel subsidies by 2024 is also not being discussed. So in other words, the $7 trillion that subsidize fossil fuels will continue, and the phasing out of fossil fuels is now put into the back burner. So there is a global report that monitors these figures very carefully, and it is called the Banking on Climate Chaos Report. And every year this report comes out. And interestingly, the major banks of the world who are actually compromising the planet are coming from the United States of America. In fact, out of the top 11 banks that are compromising the issue, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them are from the United States, 3 of them are from Canada, 3 of them are from Japan, and 1 is British. So that is the reality. Now, in a world that is compromising, is there some silver lining? Yes, there is. In fact, one of the banks that have set up a global strategy to completely stop using fossil fuels and funding fossil fuels is the European Investment Bank, based in Luxembourg. And the European Investment Bank basically have strategized and now are globally known as the climate bank. Why? Because their entire leadership, and the European Investment Bank is the European Union's investment bank. They have definitely put planet before profit in their entire strategy because their leadership are subscribing to this science. And they have a EIB climate strategy. They are focusing their impact on, in terms of disbursement of nearly 88 billion euros into renewable energy acceleration, e-mobility acceleration, and global energy transformation. In fact, they were the first bank with creating a blue ocean strategy in terms of sustainable innovation by launching the world's first green bond in 2007, led by one of their very smart executives called Aldo Romani. And today, it is interesting that what was just a 600 million euro green bond, today it is over $1 trillion in terms of green bonds. And every bit of the European Investment Bank strategy is linked to the European Green Deal. And this is the kind of leadership we are looking for in the 21st century. So it's not all doom and gloom. And Werner Hoyer, who was the president of the European Bank until this year, had this to say in November 2019. He said, "We will stop financing fossil fuels and we will launch the most ambitious climate investment strategy of any public financial institution anywhere in the world, unlocking a 1 trillion euros for climate action and environmentally sustainable investment between 2020 and 2030. And this is just to show you the kind of ways they are investing the money. They are putting close to 6 billion euros into investment and corporate R&D, 4.4 billion to fight climate action and climate energy transition. They are putting $3.3 billion euros into sustainable transportation and 1.3 billion euros into health and education and urban development. So the reason I'm sharing this is to showcase a bank that is doing the right thing while majority of the banks are doing the wrong thing. And there is hope for the planet if we have more leaders who have this attitude towards the whole investment in accelerating the renewable energy cohort of the world. These are some of the key areas that we need to discuss as we look at the climate emergency, Dishana. And the key point I'm making once again at the end of this entire discourse, where we have looked at disruptions to the simple governance principle of planet and people before profit, is that 21st century leaders have to be science-led. If they are not science-led, they will put profit before people and they will put profit before planet. So with that, I want to hand it back to you, Deshana.
Thank you for that elaboration, Doctor. One of the things that I see why these desire states that you spoke, getting banks and governments and leaderships to focus on sustainability initiations, or we call it renewable energy investments, I think it's delayed, or neither there is no incentive, because this is a word which was built on capitalism
Correct.
and profitability, or rather a person who has better financial capability, putting in a layman's way, creates power, and they creates leaderships which can sustain for their own benefits. So this is how the whole world is being governed. The entire political structure is built around that kind of investments in order to retain in power or to get in power.
Correct.
But at the same time, we do see some countries, some leaderships making a lot of effort, initiations, and understanding that these things needs to be happen to create a better leadership, and at the same time to create a better future for the upcoming generations.
Correct.
The way I see it, the only way which I see, taking small steps. I have been observing this matter for the last 15 years. I see there are more and more people are talking about sustainability, manufacturing, transportation, services, and the younger generation is more and more vocal about it. At a consumer level, that's the only way that can put pressure for corporates and governments to make sure that these sustainability initiations are being taken place. And also providing, this is the biggest challenge I see, especially in the developing countries, providing more cheaper energy sources for the consumers. Now, if you take coal for an example, the production of energy from coal for some countries is much more cheaper than going back to renewable or any other form of energy. I think these economic values also have come to play, and also it's easy to execute or produce. So this is what I have starts to observe. And also, you gave some interesting points where the European banks and some of the institutions are setting up their sustainability funding for innovation and also to help businesses to transform uh, through using new technologies like AI, creating digital transformation, and also sustainability as a one single stream, which is encouraging. I do see a lot of companies having these conversations. So, having said that, um, we have a lot of work to be done and a lot of education to be done. That's the whole objective of the 21st, 21 SGS podcast, where we bring more and more knowledge, more and more ideas, where it helps businesses, individuals, and governments to take initiations to create new opportunities, create new demands. You spoke about blue ocean strategies, create new demands where it'll give much better profitability as it proceeds. Thank you very much for your time once again, Doctor. I'm looking forward to our final topic, which is coming up, our 10th topic, which is
We'll be looking then at the 21st century leadership model again. Yeah.
yes, that'll be something which
Radical.
we are all looking forward to. Thank you very much once again for your time spent with us, and looking forward to hearing the 21st strategy template with you, Doctor. Thank you very much
you.
once again.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.